I never thought the day I bought my dream house would also be the day my family showed their true colors. After 10 years of grinding through cybersecurity certifications, climbing the corporate ladder, and saving every penny I could spare, I finally held the keys to a beautiful 3-bedroom house in the suburbs of Austin, Texas. The mortgage was entirely mine, paid for with money I had earned through countless late nights and weekend projects. As I stood in the empty living room that first evening, watching the sunset stream through the large windows, I felt something I had never experienced before. Complete peace. The house represented more than just 4 walls and a roof. It was proof that I, Alara Vance, had made it on my own terms. No handouts, no family money, no shortcuts. Just me, my laptop, and an unwavering determination to build a life I could be proud of. I had furnished it carefully, choosing each piece with the same methodical approach I used in my cybersecurity work. Everything had its place, everything served a purpose, and most importantly, everything belonged to me. That piece lasted exactly 3 days. I was setting up my home office when I heard the familiar sound of my father's truck pulling into my driveway. Through the window, I watched as not just him, but my entire family emerged from the vehicle. Richard, my father, stepped out first with that stern expression I knew all too well. Linda, my mother, followed with her perfectly styled hair and the tight smile she wore when she was about to ask for something. And finally, Chloe, my 28-year-old sister, bounced out of the back seat with her phone already in hand, probably documenting this spontaneous family visit for her Instagram stories. I hadn't invited them. I hadn't even told them my exact address yet, though I supposed it wouldn't have been hard for them to find. What struck me as odd was their serious demeanor. This wasn't a congratulatory visit to celebrate my achievement. Their body language screamed agenda. They didn't bother knocking. Richard used the spare key I had given them for emergencies, and they walked into my house as if they owned it. The irony of that thought would become apparent soon enough. "We need to talk," Richard announced, his voice carrying that authoritative tone he had perfected during my childhood. He was a man who believed his word was law, and he had never quite adjusted to the fact that his adult daughters might have opinions of their own. Linda immediately began her reconnaissance mission, walking through my living room with appraising eyes. "Oh, Alara, honey, this place is so big. Too big for just one person, don't you think?" Her voice had that saccharine quality that always preceded a guilt trip. Chloe was already making herself at home, flopping onto my new couch and putting her feet up on my coffee table. "This would be perfect for content creation," she mused, holding up her phone to capture the room's lighting. "The natural light in here is amazing. I could totally make this work for my brand." I felt my stomach clench. "What's this about?" I asked, though some primal part of me already knew I wasn't going to like the answer. Richard cleared his throat and gestured for everyone to sit down. The fact that he was orchestrating a meeting in my own living room should have been my first red flag, but I was still operating under the assumption that this was my family and they had my best interests at heart. "Alara," he began, settling into my favorite armchair as if it had always been his, "we've been talking and we think this house situation isn't working out." "What house situation?" I asked, genuinely confused. "I just moved in 3 days ago." Linda leaned forward, her hands clasped in that way that meant she was about to deploy her most manipulative tactics. "Sweetie, we're worried about you. This house is so isolated, so far from family. And it's expensive, isn't it? All those mortgage payments, the utilities, the maintenance. Wouldn't it be better to have family close by to help?" "I can afford my mortgage just fine," I said, my voice tighter than I intended. "And I like the quiet. It's perfect for working from home." Chloe looked up from her phone, where she had been scrolling through what I assumed were interior design posts. "But think about it, Alara. I'm going through such a rough patch right now. Jake and I broke up. My follower count has been stagnant, and living with mom and dad is killing my creative energy. I need space to grow, to really focus on building my brand." The pieces began clicking into place, forming a picture I desperately didn't want to see. "Chloe needs a fresh start," Linda continued, her voice taking on that pleading quality that had guilted me into countless favors over the years. "And you're her big sister. You've always been so successful, so independent. This would be the perfect opportunity for you to help her get back on her feet." "Help her how?" I asked, though I was beginning to understand exactly how. Richard leaned forward, his expression growing stern. "By letting her move in here. Temporarily, of course, just until she gets established. She could take the master bedroom, since she'll be doing a lot of video calls for her influencer work, and you could use one of the smaller rooms. It would be good for both of you. Chloe gets the space she needs, and you get family nearby. The silence that followed was deafening. I looked around at my family, these people who had raised me, who were supposed to love and support me, and realized they were sitting in my living room, asking me to give up my master bedroom in the house I had worked a decade to afford so that my adult sister could pursue her dream of being famous on the internet. This is my house, I said slowly as if speaking to children. I bought it with my money. I picked it out. I got the mortgage. I chose this location specifically because I wanted privacy and quiet. But family comes first, Linda said, her voice taking on a wounded tone. Chloe is struggling, Alara. She's trying to build something, and she needs our support. Your support. You have so much, and she has so little right now. She's 28 years old, I pointed out. She could get a job. Chloe's head snapped up from her phone, her eyes wide with indignation. Influencing is a job, Alara. It's just not a traditional 9-to-5 like yours. I'm building a brand, creating content, engaging with my community. It takes time to monetize properly. How much money did you make last year from your influencing? I asked directly. The question hung in the air like a challenge. Chloe's cheeks flushed red, and she looked to our parents for backup. That's not the point, Richard interjected sharply. The point is that you have the means to help your sister, and you're being selfish. Selfish. The word hit me like a physical blow. I had been called selfish before. Usually when I declined to bail someone out financially, or refused to drop everything to solve a family crisis that wasn't actually a crisis. But hearing it in my own living room, after everything I had sacrificed and worked for, felt like a betrayal. I'm not being selfish, I said, my voice rising slightly. I'm being an adult who worked hard for what she has. We raised you, Richard said, his voice growing cold. We fed you, clothed you, put a roof over your head for 18 years. Don't you think you owe us something? There it was. The guilt card, played with surgical precision. The implication that my success was somehow built on their foundation, and therefore belonged partially to them. The suggestion that my achievements came with strings attached, payment plans that extended indefinitely into my adult life. I don't owe you my house, I said firmly. Linda's carefully composed mask began to slip. Alara Marie Vance, I cannot believe you're being so heartless. Your sister is family. She's blood, and you're going to turn your back on her when she needs you most? I'm not turning my back on anyone, I replied, standing up to signal that this conversation was over. But I'm also not giving up the house I worked 10 years to buy. Chloe is welcome to visit any time, but she's not moving in, and she's certainly not taking my bedroom. The silence that followed was arctic. I watched as my family's expressions shifted from manipulative sweetness to cold anger. This was the moment I truly understood that they hadn't come here to celebrate my success or spend time with me. They had come here to take something from me, and my refusal to comply had revealed their true feelings. Richard stood up slowly, his face red with anger. Fine, he said, his voice tight with controlled rage. But don't come crying to us when you're old and alone in this big empty house with no family left who cares about you. Your father's right, Linda added, gathering her purse with sharp, angry movements. You're choosing a house over your family. I hope it's worth it. Chloe was the last to get up, making a show of looking around the room one more time. I really thought you were different, Alara. I thought you actually cared about me. I guess I was wrong. She paused at the door, her phone already out. I hope you know that everyone is going to hear about this. And then they were gone, leaving me standing alone in my living room, shaking with adrenaline and disbelief. I had just experienced something I couldn't quite name, but it felt like a fundamental shift in my understanding of my family dynamics. For the first time in my life, I had refused to sacrifice my own well-being for their demands, and their reaction had been swift and brutal. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept replaying the conversation, wondering if I had been too harsh, if I should have found some compromise. Maybe I could have let Chloe stay in the guest room for a few weeks, just to help her get back on her feet. Maybe I was being selfish. But then I thought about the 10 years of sacrifices that had led to this moment. The weekends spent studying for certifications while my friends were out having fun. The tiny apartment with the leaky ceiling that I had endured for 3 years to save money. The countless nights of instant ramen and generic groceries. The freelance projects I had taken on top of my full-time job, working until 2 in the morning to build up my savings. I had earned this house. Every square foot of it belonged to me, paid for with my sweat and dedication. And more than that, I had earned the right to make decisions about my own life without having to justify them to anyone, including my family. The next morning, I woke up to 17 missed calls and 43 text messages. My phone had been buzzing throughout the night, but I had turned off the sound after the first few interruptions. The messages were from various family members, friends of my parents, and even some people I barely knew. Chloe had been busy. I opened Instagram to find a lengthy post on Chloe's account, complete with a carefully curated photo of her looking sad and vulnerable. The caption was a masterpiece of manipulation, describing her heartbreak at being abandoned by her successful sister who had forgotten where she came from. She talked about family values, about the importance of lifting each other up, and about how money had changed some people. She didn't mention my name directly, but she tagged me in the comments, along with several hashtags about family drama and disappointment. The post had hundreds of comments, most of them from her followers expressing sympathy and outrage on her behalf. Many of them had tagged me directly, filling my notifications with messages calling me selfish, heartless, and worse. Someone had somehow found my address and posted it in the comments, along with a suggestion that I needed to learn about family values the hard way. I screenshotted everything and then blocked Chloe on all social media platforms. If she wanted to wage a war of public opinion, she was going to have to do it without my participation. The harassment escalated over the following days. I came home from work to find garbage scattered across my front lawn. Someone had egged my car overnight, leaving sticky residue that took hours to clean off. My doorbell rang at all hours, usually followed by the sound of running footsteps when I approached the door. I installed a comprehensive security system, complete with cameras and motion sensors, documenting every incident for what I was beginning to realize might become a legal matter. The breaking point came a week later, when I received a certified letter from a law firm I had never heard of. Inside was a lawsuit filed by Richard and Linda Vance against their daughter Alara Vance, claiming breach of verbal contract and demanding monetary compensation for emotional distress caused by the defendant's failure to honor family obligations. I read the document 3 times, certain I was misunderstanding something. But there it was, in legal terminology. My parents were suing me for not giving my house to my sister. They were claiming that there had been an implicit agreement that successful family members would support struggling family members, and that my refusal to honor this agreement had caused Chloe significant emotional trauma. The lawsuit demanded that I either transfer ownership of my house to Chloe or pay her $50,000 in damages for the distress my selfishness had caused her. It also requested payment of their legal fees and a formal apology. I sat in my kitchen holding the papers with trembling hands and realized that my family had escalated from emotional manipulation to legal warfare. They were actually trying to use the court system to force me to give up my home. That night, I called the one person in my family who had always been honest with me, Uncle Ben, my father's younger brother. Ben had been the black sheep of the family for as long as I could remember, criticized for his unconventional career choices and his refusal to conform to Richard's rigid ideas about success and family loyalty. "I was wondering when you'd call," Ben said when I explained the situation. "I heard about the lawsuit from my buddy who works at the courthouse." "Uncle Ben, I don't understand what's happening," I said, my voice cracking with the strain of the past week. "They're acting like I committed a crime by buying a house." Ben was quiet for a long moment. "Alara, honey, your parents have always been like this. They just got better at hiding it as you got older. Richard has this idea that everything good that happens to anyone in the family is somehow his due, and Linda enables it because it's easier than standing up to him. But they're my parents," I said, voicing the confusion that had been plaguing me. "They raised me. They're supposed to want what's best for me." "They want what's best for them," Ben corrected gently. "And right now, what's best for them is for you to solve Chloe's problems so they don't have to deal with her anymore. She's been living in their basement for 2 years, Alara. 2 years of no job, no contributions to household expenses, just posting pictures online and waiting for fame to find her." This was news to me. I had thought Chloe was living independently, supporting herself through her influencer work. The idea that she had been dependent on our parents this entire time put her demands in a new light. "They've been trying to get her out of the house for months," Ben continued. Richard complained to me about it at Christmas. Said she was driving them crazy, sleeping until noon, having friends over at all hours, expecting Linda to do her laundry and cook her meals. When you bought that house, they saw an opportunity to kill two birds with one stone. Get Chloe out of their hair and make it your problem instead. The picture was becoming clearer, and it was uglier than I had imagined. My parents hadn't been concerned about Chloe's well-being or my isolation. They had been looking for a way to offload their adult daughter onto someone else, and my success had made me the perfect target. But the lawsuit, I said, how can they possibly think they have a legal case? Ben snorted. They don't. Any competent lawyer would tell them this is frivolous. But Carol is bankrolling this whole thing, and she's got more money than sense. Aunt Carol, my mother's wealthy older sister, had always been a force of chaos in our family. She was the type of person who enjoyed drama, and seemed to get a thrill out of manipulating family dynamics. The fact that she was funding this legal assault made perfect sense. She's probably loving this, Ben continued. Gets to play puppet master and stick it to the family member who dared to be successful without her help. Carol never liked that you made it on your own. Threatens her narrative that family success comes from her generosity. So what do I do? I asked, feeling more lost than I had since this whole nightmare began. You fight back, Ben said simply. You get yourself a good lawyer, you document everything they've done, and you show that judge exactly what kind of people you're dealing with. And Alara, honey, you stop feeling guilty about this. You didn't do anything wrong. You bought a house. That's not a crime, and it's not selfish, and it's sure as hell not grounds for a lawsuit. After I hung up with Uncle Ben, I spent the night researching attorneys who specialized in family law and harassment cases. By morning, I had scheduled consultations with 3 different firms. By the end of the week, I had retained Sarah Martinez, a sharp-eyed lawyer who had looked at my case and immediately identified it as what she called a family shakedown disguised as a lawsuit. I see this more often than you'd think, Sarah told me during our first meeting. Family members who think success comes with obligations, who believe that earning money means you owe them something. The good news is that this case is so weak, it's almost insulting to the legal system. Sarah helped me compile evidence for what would become our counter-strategy. We gathered my financial records, showing clearly that every penny used to purchase the house had come from my own accounts. We documented the harassment campaign, using my security footage and the social media posts Chloe had made. We even found evidence of tax evasion in Richard's small business dealings, information that Uncle Ben had reluctantly provided after learning about the lawsuit. The goal isn't to destroy them, Sarah explained as we prepared for court. The goal is to make it clear to the judge that this lawsuit is frivolous and potentially malicious. We want damages for the harassment, a restraining order to prevent future contact, and legal fees covered. The day of the hearing arrived faster than I had expected. I walked into the courthouse wearing my best business suit, feeling every bit the professional I had worked so hard to become. Sarah walked beside me, her briefcase full of evidence and her confidence reassuring. My family was already seated in the courtroom when we arrived. Richard wore a suit I had never seen before, probably purchased specially for the occasion. Linda was dressed in her Sunday best, her hair perfectly styled and her makeup designed to make her look like a grieving mother. Chloe sat between them wearing a dress that was probably borrowed from Linda, her hands folded in her lap in a pose of wounded innocence. What struck me most was the matching t-shirts they wore under their formal clothes. When they removed their blazers, I could see the iron-on lettering, "Family over everything." It was such a blatant attempt at manipulating public opinion that I almost laughed. Almost. The hearing began with their lawyer, a nervous-looking man who clearly knew he was fighting a losing battle, presenting their case. He spoke about family obligations, about the emotional distress Chloe had suffered, about the implicit contracts that bind families together. He showed pictures of Chloe looking sad, and presented testimony about her struggles to establish her career. When it was Sarah's turn, she stood up with the calm confidence of someone who held all the winning cards. "Your Honor," she began, "what we have here is not a breach of contract case. What we have here is a family attempting to use the legal system to force a successful daughter to subsidize an adult sibling's lifestyle. The plaintiff has provided no evidence of any verbal or written agreement. They have provided no documentation showing any financial contribution to the defendant's house purchase. They have, however, provided ample evidence of harassment, public defamation, and what can only be described as extortion. Sarah presented our evidence methodically. Bank statements showing that every payment for my house had come from my personal accounts. Documentation of my work history and income. Screenshots of Chloe's social media harassment campaign. Security footage of the vandalism at my property. Records showing that Chloe had made no income from her influencer activities in the previous 3 years. But the moment that changed everything came when Sarah asked Chloe a simple question. Ms. Vance, you've testified that you're a professional content creator and influencer. Can you please tell the court your gross income from these activities for the past 3 years? Chloe's confident facade crumbled instantly. She looked to her parents, then to her lawyer, then back to Sarah. Well, it's not about the money right now. I'm building my brand, establishing my voice. Monetization comes later in the process. So your income was $0, Sarah pressed. It's not that simple, Chloe said, her voice rising defensively. Influence can't always be measured in dollars. I have followers, I have engagement, I have brand partnerships and development. Your Honor, Sarah said, turning to the judge, the plaintiff is asking this court to force a homeowner to transfer property worth $300,000 to someone who has admittedly earned zero income from her chosen profession. This is not a family dispute. This is an attempted theft disguised as a lawsuit. The judge, a stern-looking woman in her 60s, had been taking notes throughout the proceedings. When Sarah finished presenting our case, she looked up at my parents with an expression that could have frozen water. Mr. and Mrs. Vance, she said, her voice carrying the weight of decades of legal experience, I have one question for you. Outside of the biological fact that you gave birth to and raised the defendant, what specific financial or legal contribution did you make to the purchase of her home? The silence that followed was deafening. Richard opened his mouth several times, but no words came out. Linda stared at her hands. Their lawyer shuffled through his papers, as if looking for an answer that didn't exist. I see, the judge continued. And can you provide this court with any written documentation of an agreement between you and your daughter regarding the use of her property? More silence. The judge closed her folder and looked directly at my parents. This case is dismissed with prejudice, meaning it cannot be refiled. Mr. and Mrs. Vance, you have wasted this court's time with what can only be described as a frivolous lawsuit. You are hereby ordered to pay the defendant's legal fees in the amount of $15,000. And I am strongly considering referring this matter to the district attorney for investigation of potential harassment charges. She turned to me with a slightly softer expression. Miss Vance, you are free to pursue a restraining order if you feel it necessary. Based on the evidence presented today, I would recommend it. The gavel came down with a sound that seemed to echo through my entire life. It was over. The lawsuit was dismissed, my family's claims were rejected, and for the first time in weeks, I could breathe freely. As we left the courthouse, I could hear Chloe crying loudly in the parking lot, her voice carrying across the asphalt as she berated our parents for ruining everything. Richard's face was red with embarrassment and anger. Linda kept looking around as if afraid someone would recognize them. I didn't look back. The following week, I filed for a restraining order that prohibited my parents and sister from coming within 500 feet of my home or workplace. I also filed a complaint with the IRS regarding Richard's tax evasion, providing them with the evidence Uncle Ben had reluctantly shared. Within a month, Richard received notice that he was being audited. Chloe's GoFundMe campaign, which she had started to rebuild her life after family betrayal, was reported and shut down for violating the platform's rules about fraudulent fundraising. Her follower count began dropping as people realized the drama wasn't as entertaining when it started affecting real people's lives. But the most satisfying consequence was completely unintentional. Aunt Carol, embarrassed by the public failure of the lawsuit she had funded and worried about potential legal liability, cut off all financial support to Richard and Linda. Without her backing, they were forced to face the consequences of their actions alone. Months passed. My life settled into a rhythm I had never experienced before. Peace. I worked from my home office, tended to my garden, and slowly began to understand what it meant to live without constantly looking over my shoulder for the next family crisis I would be expected to solve. Uncle Ben became a regular visitor, often bringing his wife and kids for weekend barbecues. Through him, I learned that Chloe had finally been forced to get a real job at a local coffee shop after her influencer dreams collapsed. Richard and Linda had sold their house and moved to a smaller apartment, unable to maintain their previous lifestyle without the money they had been hoping to extract from me. I adopted a German shepherd named Titan from the local animal shelter. He was a gentle giant who had been returned twice by families who found him too much work. I understood the feeling of being seen as difficult when you were really just trying to protect yourself. 6 months after the courthouse victory, I was hosting a barbecue in my backyard. Uncle Ben was manning the grill while his kids played with Titan in the grass. Sarah, who had become a friend as well as my attorney, was there with her husband. Several colleagues from work had come by, along with neighbors I had gotten to know since moving in. As I looked around at the gathering, I realized something profound had happened. I had built a chosen family, people who valued me for who I was, rather than what I could provide them. These people celebrated my successes without expecting to profit from them. They offered support without keeping a ledger of what I owed in return. Later that evening, after everyone had gone home, I walked through my house, taking inventory of everything I had built. In my office, hanging beside my professional certifications and awards, was a framed copy of the court's dismissal of my family's lawsuit. It wasn't there as a trophy or a symbol of victory over them. It was there as a reminder to myself of what I was capable of when I stopped accepting unacceptable treatment. I had learned that family isn't always about blood. Sometimes it's about choosing people who choose you back, who celebrate your successes and support your growth without expecting payment in return. I had learned that setting boundaries isn't selfish, it's necessary for survival. And I had learned that the guilt and obligation I had carried for so long weren't love. They were chains I had been taught to wear so willingly that I had forgotten they weren't permanent fixtures. Standing in my living room that night, looking out at the garden I had planted and the life I had built, I felt something I had been searching for my entire adult life: complete and total peace. Not the peace of having no problems, but the peace of knowing I had the strength and wisdom to handle whatever problems arose. My phone buzzed with a text message. For just a moment, my old anxiety returned, the learned response to unexpected communication. But the message was from Uncle Ben, thanking me for hosting and telling me how proud he was of the life I had built. I smiled and typed back a response, then turned off my phone and went to bed in my own house, in my own bedroom, surrounded by the life I had earned and protected. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new opportunities, and new reasons to be grateful for the courage I had found to choose myself. The last thing I saw before falling asleep was Titan curled up on his bed in the corner of my room, a rescue dog who had found his forever home, with a person who understood what it meant to be rejected by those who were supposed to love you unconditionally. We had both learned that sometimes the most loving thing you can do is walk away from people who mistake your boundaries for betrayal. In the morning, I would wake up free.